Howdy, howdy out there. Today we are going to rock on some seed planting. We're out at the raised bed gardens out at the hoop houses on the Western Colorado Community College campus. And I just happened to have in my hand a package of beet seeds. So we're going to give that a try here in the old growing beds. We did come out and seed some carrots and some beets 3 weeks ago. And we had a real good germination on the carrots, but not so hot on the beets. So I'm not convinced that my seed supply was the best. A couple of the seeds came up, but quite a few didn't germinate. So that's pretty handy when you have the option of picking up a seed packet, and it will tell you on the back that this was packed for the 2017 season. So in my world, that's fairly fresh. It will also give you all sorts of information about planting temperatures and the seed depth and the spacing and all that kind of gear, which is nice to know if you haven't planted these before. The problem that I run into is that I get donated seed. I get seed that's shared. I do seed swaps, and so everybody shares their seeds, and I end up with these bags that just says Chioggia beets. That's all there is to it. So I have to figure out how is the best to plant these seeds. And when I pull out these Chioggia seeds here, they're quite large. With my fat fingers, I can in fact pick out one seed at a time. That's a little different than these Scarlet Nante carrots that were donated by Condor Seeds to us here. And you'll see that they are a quite small seed here that is much more difficult for me to pick up one at a time with my fat fingers. So that becomes a little bit of a trick on how do we get those accurately in the ground. The rule of thumb that I was taught many moons ago that I tend to like is, there again, I use my hands as my tools as much as I can. They don't need batteries. I don't leave them under the truck. I don't leave them laying at home. I always have them here with me. So what I do is I take one individual seed here and I hold it up against my seed planting diagram chart here, known as my small finger. And when I lay that seed up here, the general rule of thumb is to plant the seed 2 to 3 times the depth of the seed. So if I go here and I go 1, 2, 3, that puts it right about this line here where that little half moon is on my finger there. And that's about the depth that this seed needs to be planted. So I have a couple options. One, I can go around and jam my finger, or I can compare it to my index finger maybe, or I can come around and you'll see on my handy planting stick, formerly known as a chopstick, I have marked out different depths. So if I measure out my finger here, I'm looking at about this line here. That line would be too shallow, that line would be too deep. So right about on that line is the depth that I'm looking for. So for my beet seed, now I know the depth of the seed, and I can come over here, and we have a couple of beet seeds that did germinate. So I can come over here. There again on the seed packet, they'll tell you 4-inch spacing. I know that my knuckle is 4 inches of width. That would be 6 inches. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I know my fist at a 4-inch, so I take from my existing plants, come 4 inches over, and I can come from my chopstick and come down, and then another 4 inches, and another 4 inches here, and I've got 3 real nice holes where now I can pop my seeds into, and I know that I am just the right depth and just the right planting location. I do like to go and do all my seeding at once here so that I can see where my seed packets, where my seed holes are, and it's easier for me to measure across there and be able to put those in. The other option that you can do, if you would like then, would be to take your seed planting stick there and do a solid line. Once you've done a handful of seeds, you can switch over to a finger. There's different varieties of dibbles, things you can do. But in this solid line component now I have the option of popping out a seed and going in every 4 inches and just dropping one seed at a time. And there again, because my seed of choice here is quite large, that's easy to do. A little bit more challenging here if you're working with carrot seed. One option would be, there again, I'll make my planting line here. Carrots will be much more shallow, so if I measure 2 to 3 times and compare it to my stick, I'm going to be on the smallest, the most lowest mark there. So now I'll come in and make my groove here in the soil, And then come in and I'm going to sprinkle in the seeds, trying to space them out 1 to 2 inches apart. Holy cow, that's really difficult to do. I really like using these cheap little seeders. You can find them at a variety of mail order online locations or local garden centers. It has grooves depending on the size of the seed. And so you can see it goes from 0, not letting seeds out, to a very small seed. So if I put my carrot seeds in here, now where my fat fingers can't pick up a seed at a time, I can now tap, and there's a series of ridges that slow down the seeds so that it doesn't come out quite as fast. And now I can literally tap out 1 seed at a time, and 1, be much more accurate in my planting, and 2, not be wasting a lot of seed. So that's a pretty handy way to go. Whoops, almost went the wrong bag there. You can see here from our planting 3 weeks ago, these are carrot seeds that we did do a sprinkle method, and you can see now they're quite thick. This is very competitive, so we do need to come in and thin out. And I'm looking for about a finger spacing, so I'll pick out a really nice plant there and then pull these around it here. And now I've got a nice finger spacing there, and a finger spacing there, and a finger spacing there. And then you can see I'm giving these plants room to go ahead and grow in. Just over this away here, we have some carrots that we did plant. These were planted, where are we at now? 6 weeks ago. And we've thinned these carrots out quite a bit, and now you can see they're growing in, and they have their true leaves, and they have plenty of space to fill in and mature. So the other thing that comes into play, seeds need to be underground, right? Because they grow best in the dark. That's where the moisture of the soil is inherently pressed up against the seeds to keep them moist the whole time. So now that I've put my plants into the ground, now I can pinch close the holes where the beets are, and I'm tapping the soil in to, again, just put that soil up next to the surface of the seed. They need air, because in the air pockets, that's how water can get down as well. So I'm not smashing. I see a number of people where they'll plant their seeds and then come in and really pound them in and really work them into the soil, and that's not helping anything. That's shutting out the air, and it's making it more difficult for the moisture to get down to the seeds. Once the seeds are in the ground, we need to make sure to keep them real moist. So that might be watering them once a day, 3 times a day, whatever it takes to keep them moist. And then those big seeds that are deeper in the soil, it's a whole lot easier to do. So one trick on the small seeds, because the small seeds are very shallow, I like using corrugated cardboard. I'll come in and water down my seed bed of carrots or arugula, real small seeds there. Water down the top side of the cardboard, put the wet side down, and then water the other side here as well. Put a rock on it to keep it in place, and that does a couple things for you. One, it keeps the moisture in the soil, so you keep a nice even moisture. It also keeps it dark, because seeds grow well in the dark. That's why we put them in the soil. So in those shallow seeds being close to the smaller seeds being close to the soil surface, this can help keep them shaded. Also, when you keep this cardboard, now you can come and water this cardboard on top. It's like a giant sponge. And when you get it nice and saturated, it can hold on to moisture throughout the course of the day, and you're watering once a day, not 3 times a day, which can be a huge time saving for you. So if I know that these carrot seeds will germinate in 7 to 10 days, about day 5, I'll come out and have a look-see, nothing happening. Come back on day 6, a couple of them germinated, kind of here and there, let them go. When you lift up the cardboard and somewhere between 1/2 and 2/3 of the seeds have germinated, now you can take the cardboard off, and you're back on the clock to be hand watering to keep them moist so that they fill in. If you let the cardboard go too long, they'll get real leggy and they won't develop their chlorophyll real well, and you might have to reseed. But that cardboard trick is a really nice way to keep moisture in your soil there to get a good germination rate. So sometimes the seeds can be so small, and that if the soil's too porosity, if there's too much porosity of the soil, if it's a real chunky aggregate kind of a soil, the seed can fall into pockets and we don't get a real good germination rate. That's one of the problems we have here with the raised beds. Another thing would be temperature. If it's too cold outside, especially with overnight temperatures, you won't get a good germination. I was always taught to do the butt test. So you sit your butt on the soil, and if it feels warm, it's time to plant. If you sit down, it feels cold through your jeans, not time to plant yet. So that doesn't mean the season ends, though, because inside your home you have opportunities to plant seeds. So I like to use cell trays. This would be a 72 cell tray. It has 72 little individual cells in this tray. I also use a 115 for smaller plants like onions and leeks, and I use a bigger 45 cell tray for the tomatoes and peppers because it gives a little more of a soil block. So this would be pak choi that we did seed out here a couple of weeks ago, and out of the approximate 20 seeds we only had 3 germinate. So good for me, knowing that pak choi seeds are quite small. I went ahead that same day and I planted some inside there in my solarium, and they germinated very nicely here in the seed tray. So I know that they're time to be transplanted because their true leaves have formed, and you can see that they're quite mature and doing very well, and they need some more space for their roots. That can be a little bit tricky though when you've got other potted plants. This would be a Nepal tomato, and it looks to be quite large compared to the size of the pot. But if you pop the soil off, the pot off, and you can see the soil, this plant is perfect and ready to be transplanted because it has new root hairs just developing on the bottom. And you can see it has real nice root development coming out the side. These are the feeder roots right on the end, and they're seeking nutrients now. So this would be the perfect time to transplant this plant. If you pull the soil block out and you don't see any roots at all, let the plant go and let it fill in its root pocket first so that it's mature enough to withstand the stress of being transplanted. Also, if you were to pull the pot off and find this root ball, you went way too long. That's not, the plant is desperately seeking nutrients, and plastic is not the answer. So this would be a perfect plant to transplant. If I were to transplant this delicate tomato plant, I would do a step called hardening off. And I would leave this plant outside during the day because it's been in a solarium. It's been in perfect conditions. There's been no wind, no insects, no birds, nothing on it. So I would take this plant out to the location where I intend to plant it and let it get acclimated there. Let it get used to the morning sun, the afternoon sun, the neighbor's shade tree that shades it in the afternoon, the wind pattern coming between the house and the garage. You know, get it used to the environmental conditions first. Then, second step would be to actually transplant it into the ground. It's very stressful for a plant to be removed from the only soil it's ever known, and especially when you're bringing it from indoors to outside. That can be very stressful. So on some tropical type plants and very delicate plants, you might put it outside during the day for a couple hours and then bring it back in. And then bring it outside for the majority of the day and bring it back in. Maybe let it outside all day long, bring it back in. Let it go overnight with a little bit of sheet or plastic or protection, right? Get a little bit cold at night, bring it back in. Then eventually work up to letting it sit outside, fully exposed, leave it outside for a couple days, let it get acclimated to the temperature, the wind patterns, everything outside, then transplant in the ground, and you'll have a lot better success rate. So back to our pak choi here. Yet another of my high-tech tools, the always handy and available butter knife. And it's fairly straightforward to come down the side of the cell there and pop the plant right out there. And you can see there again is our feeder roots, and we have filled the entire volume of soil that's available to us. So this is a perfect time to transplant this plant right here. And I'm aiming to plant it right at the soil level, because when I planted the seed, the plant knows where the soil level is. So I want to maintain that soil level. So I'll come over here into my growing bed there and carve out a little hole. If I had some nutrients, a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer, because this is a nitrogen rich crop, I might pop it down in there, a little bit of compost maybe. I have added compost to this bed, and I know I have good fertility. So now I'm just popping it right in the hole and flattening that soil right out around the top where it stays level with the soil that it's known. And now we have successfully transplanted that one. Another opportunity that comes up, here's a good example here, where there's actually 2 seeds that came into this cell tray. So if they were older seeds, we might plant 2 of them to see how they germinate. So you can see here's 1 and 2. So nature works in circles, and the root hairs here are bound up together. This plant is actually a couple days past due. You can see where the root hairs are starting to wrap around the bottom. So I'll do my best to unwind them, as you know, trying to minimize the plant shock. I'm not ripping and pulling. Then I'm going to take the 2 different plants, holding them here in my hands, and working in a series of circles to loosen up stop those root hairs. If I just pull these apart, I'll just rip and shear all the root hairs. But see how they're just unraveling from each other? And look at that, how they just let go right there. So now with this one, I can come over here and get my hole and just pop it right down in there, again maintaining that same soil level that it was at in the container. And then come on over here and pop this guy down in its own little location back here, right next to the old chive plant. And voila, and there again, I'm not smashing, I'm not collapsing in those air pockets, but I'm just transplanting down in. And now you see where we have a seed that germinated, and on my 6-inch spacing here to let the pak choi fully develop in, now I've supplemented in. So my first round seeding was a little bit of a success, but my indoor seeding was a huge success, and I've supplemented in my crop. And I can grow those out to maturity. Real quick then, as far as maturity, this would be tot soy planted next to it. And one option would be to grow like the head lettuce next to it. You can grow a good full head of entire tot soy, cut at the soil level, and it's gone, right? Same with these pak choi. Other option is to come in and continually harvest. This is a technique called cut and come again. So I'm going to leave at least 5 good leaves here in the center to still make photosynthesis and still make for plant growth, and this becomes a nice salad mix. So I can come around and take leaves of the lettuce, the baby kale, the pak choi, the sorrel. I can just keep clipping around the outer edge, and they keep growing back in. And so you can get a continual harvest for weeks that way off of the same plant. Otherwise, I would probably want to start some new pak choi seeds today. If I'm going to let that grow to full size and harvest it, I'll plant some more seeds today, so that when that's ready to be harvested and I cut and remove the whole plant, I've got another plant to go right in its place and keep harvesting full heads that way, if that's what your market needs. But this right here is going to be some amazing salad mix that I'm going to eat tonight. Bon appetit.